Thank you, David. It's a pleasure to be here and to be on a panel and such esteemed panelists talking about fan engagement. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome up to the stage Adam, Marcel, Bhavesh, and Les. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you very much, guys. The topic of fan engagement. It's an important one. Like the first point I'll make is kind of how the industry sees it. So a little stat from the PwC Sports Survey 2019. Respondents were asked the greatest opportunity for increasing revenues within sports business. And what ranked out top was fan engagements, with 85% of respondents saying that they saw that as the most important way to increase revenues. So it's clearly something that's on people's minds within the industry. And I think one of the key challenges, firstly, defining what it is. So I'm going to just move along the line, starting with you first, Les, and just ask you a very broad question to kick off. How would you define engagement?
Okay, thank you. Just as a bit of context, Kayo Sports is an Australian-based OTT service that's almost 12 months old. We have about 50 sports, 180 different competitions, and you know, we've come from a traditional pay TV world where we've decided to kind of launch a dedicated OTT service targeted at kind of the streaming generation, if you like. So engagement for us is quite critical because I guess our shareholders and our investors, you know, really judge that in terms of commercial output. So we very much are focused on engagement as an organisation, no matter whether you're in the product team, technology team, marketing, sales team, and so forth. And it's all around trying to, quite simply, get customers to stay and pay as long as possible. And, you know, taking them through the funnel and then through trying to get them to pay, we charge $25 a month. And I guess trying to get an extra month or an extra, you know, week out of them, what have you. So for us, engagement ultimately is measured in commercial outcomes because I guess that's kind of, we have to pay the bills at some stage.
That makes sense. Same question to you, Bhavesh. How would you define engagement?
So I'd add on what Les just said. I think the engagement for us is a bit different. We're a broadcaster first and foremost. We're in 43 different countries. And it really varies by platform. So what we measure engagement on Instagram is very different than what we would measure on OTT or on our linear channels. But it ultimately is about feeding the bottom line. But for us, for sure, time spent with our platforms, driving tune-in, we see a lot of correlation between engagement on snacking content before a match or during a match, leading in forward and watching a match, whether it's on our OTT or on broadcast. So engagement is really, really important. But how we define it seems to be changing all the time, especially as the platforms themselves change in terms of content types and posting types. And so it's a constant experiment, but we're always trying.
Super, thank you very much. Marcel, let's give you an opportunity. How would you define engagement?
Well, as a technology provider to broadcasters, we see engagement as providing choice through technology. And choice, I think, is a really important thing for consumers these days. They tend to want to see things when they want, how they want it, and to provide the flexibility, not necessarily alienating passive viewers as they might be now, but adding extra technology that enables that choice for new consumers and engagement of people who may not have been engaged previously.
Super, thank you very much. And same with you, Adam. How would you define it?
Yeah, it's interesting. If you look at what Deltatre offers, you know, everything from cameras in stadiums through to designing, building and running OTT platforms and studio graphics and broadcast graphics. So, you know, in many ways, what we do is all about engagement. But I think it's perhaps easier to look at the results of engagement, you know, to define that rather than what engagement is. And for us, it's all about revenue. It's about, you know, growing our customers' revenues. It's about acquiring consumers, but it's also about keeping them. You know, if you look at an unengaged consumer, you'll lose them. They'll roll off. They'll go and find something else to do. So we look at engagement in terms of how consumers interact with content. We look at it in terms of how they interact with the discovery process. You know, we need to live in a world where consumers move very quickly from arriving at a service to enjoying content. So we need to make the discoverability bit easy, but we also need to make sure they're engaging with content in a way that's relevant to them and in a way that excites them. And I think, yeah, to add to that a bit, we get, quite rightly, we get very focused with live content. But if you really want to look at, for me, what an engaged consumer is, it's one who you keep in the off-season as well. It's one who you keep before a game and after a game. It's building that fan equity that it is the truly enthusiastic, passionate consumer, not only of some league or a club or some piece of content, it's of the service that you're offering. So it's a fairly broad definition, I guess, if you want to look at it in aggregate.
Yeah, that's great. And I think what's coming across is obviously it is broad and there are opinions kind of each side of the spectrum, but it really does come back down to kind of business value as well. Super. So just thinking about the very, the top of the funnel, trying to drive engagement as a starting point, that really kind of starts with content. So question for Bhavesh and Les, and Bhavesh, I'll come to you first. When you're making those decisions, when you're looking to drive engagement, how do you kind of split your content mix between, traditional linear, your OTT, third-party platforms, social platforms? How do you kind of break down the mix and make those crucial business decisions?
So again, it's market by market, and there's no one-size-fit-all tender process. Some of the rights that we buy are very, very fixed onto pay. Some of them are broad, and it's almost up to us on where we put them. And then you have to make a pragmatic commercial decision. We just launched an ad-supported package in the US, taking content that was previously only behind our 10-channel package on pay TV and making it freely available on a very, very broad number of platforms. And for us, it's about making sure that that content can get to a really, really wide audience, but still have the integrity of the beIn production, the beIn brand, and the beIn treatment, and along with that, the sponsors and advertisers that we work with. And I think it's a good balance to be able to take some of the content, create a exposure and a broad access to it as an on-ramp for those that really want to watch more of La Liga or more of La Liga can come over to the pay TV side.
Awesome. Les, your thoughts?
So one of the challenges that we've got is that we've got an abundance of sport. So we leverage off the back of our pay TV relationship, our sister companies, and via Fox Sports, we produce a lot of content ourselves domestically, but we also partner with beIn Sport, who are a great partner of ours, and ESPN as well, where we're distributing all of their content coming into Australia on our OTT platform. So one of the honest answer is we hold nothing back. We're quite privileged in that we've been able to kind of push everything out onto our dedicated OTT platform, that's kind of branded separately. And in fact, we're actually pushing more out because we're not constrained by the linear world. So on Foxtel in Australia, there's 7 Fox Sports channels, 2 or 3 beIn, and similarly for ESPN, but we don't have that limitation. So in a given weekend, we can often be doing in excess of 250 to 300 live events over a weekend. So we are no longer kind of bound by that. So we really, really think about trying to give control and content to our customers and allow them to kind of make a decision on what they want to watch.
Nice. Marcel and Adam, obviously advising clients, working closely with broadcasters and other rights owners. Would you kind of take the same approach? What would your advice be? And I suppose one add to that is sometimes it can become a bit complex if you're looking to put in numerous different places. Do you try and kind of make it simple for partners?
Yes, and we have to. I guess we have established infrastructure, established practices that have obviously been seen to be successful. A non-disruptive way of enhancing the ability for people to become engaged without alienating people that don't care about any extra features or whatever. They just want to enjoy it the way they always have. But I think that engagement part is provided with technology through just people experiencing it in a deeper way and committing to doing that. So what our advice is to provide those bits and pieces for maybe the 20% at the moment who are the extreme fans, who want to become more immersed, want to become more involved, are committing money, are committing their name, their addresses, they're getting their kids involved, all those sorts of things. And that, as a technology partner that sees things maybe from a different perspective and a fresh perspective, to say, look, this is available without actually changing any of your current processes, but you're enhancing the experience for your customers and inevitably engaging them more and getting more revenue out of them.
Yeah, I'd concur on the simplicity side, and there's a lot of value. I mean, if you're launching an entirely new service, you want the thing live, so get it live quickly, don't overcomplicate it. And the crucial first thing then to do before you start investing in too many bells and whistles, is to understand the market. Now, who's using this thing? Who's the audience? Not only in terms of where they live and what their credit card number is, that's almost kind of table stakes, but what turns them on? What excites them about the content you've got? How do they like to consume it? Do they want to consume it on mobile in the morning? Do they want to consume it on a big TV in the afternoon? Are Juventus supporters more disposed to viewing content on a mobile? So there's lots of different tribes that exist within a universe of consumers, and understanding who they are, how they like to consume content, what kind of UX appeals to them. Everyone's different, and we've seen a big difference in the kind of consumption, the kind of usage that you get based on different kinds of UX layouts and different content recommendations and different kinds of content in different scenarios. So understand that. I think other than if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and at the bottom, it has to work. Beyond that, understand the consumer. Get to know who they are, what they like and what they don't like, and adapt accordingly and quickly.
Hierarchy of needs is getting very deep. I like
Yeah,
this.
sorry,
This is
that
really,
was unintentional.
Room 1 is the philosophical room. We're getting into it. I like it. Your point actually about different screen and consumption habits, I think, leads nicely onto the next kind of topic area. So, not just the fact that people are watching more on mobile, which I think most of the room will obviously know that. Obviously, then there's the ability to go cast to a big screen, all that type of stuff. But going like one layer further in terms of the consumption experience and thinking a bit about interactivity, there's now plenty of options with some of the tools you mentioned, and of course with lots of platforms that offer this, like for people to engage and interact actively with the broadcast. I'm going to start with you, Les. Yep. In terms of like how my question kind of is, do you think that's important? Do you cater for it for fans? Do you offer them options? How do you tackle that kind of interactivity space?
Yeah, I mean, clearly it's becoming more and more important. I mean, let me start with who is our audience. So, we're just over 400,000 paying customers at the moment, and what we see is when we kind of set off on this journey, we kind of were targeting the, probably under 35s, and we're seeing, in excess of 60-70% of our audience being under that age group. So we're hitting that sweet spot, and then naturally you go a little bit higher. So you've got to kind of meet their demands. And then some of the things that we're seeing is in terms of mobile usage, for sure, if you were to count play views and streams, which, lots of people put some big numbers up, and we similarly see those numbers, probably accounts for 65-70% of interactions. But something that's probably slightly more controversial is that actually what we're seeing is probably about 50% of our total consumption in terms of hours and engagement, which is one of the first things we talked about, is on a big screen. So what we're seeing is younger demographic. It's not just all about mobile. Mobile, certainly interactions on weekends, out and about, consuming short form content for sure. But when it comes to live viewing, the big screen's really important. What we're seeing is if we can get you to a big screen, where you're sticking, you're paying and you're staying. And the other factor that we're seeing is also in terms of if we can get you consuming more than one sport. So on average, when we kicked off Kayo Sports, our research suggested in the Australian market, people are typically interested in about three to four sports. What we're seeing on average is they're actually consuming up to about 7 sports. So we can see as we can get you across the value chain in terms of that side of things, we're really able to kind of get you to stick. Coming to your point around interactions, I think what we're seeing is we've developed some pretty cool features like split view, where you can watch up to 4 different sports or the same sports at the same time. So really lent itself well to kind of F1, MotoGP, where you can just launch a button, watch interactive screens. Key moments, where if you're watching something live or from start, you can kind of jump straight to the key moments and those sort of things. Even little features like no spoilers. Some sports fans are quite fanatics and they want to come in halfway through the game because they're on their way home. We switch off so you can not anywhere on our platform actually kind of see any scores whatsoever. So just giving, I think, sports fans those features and those interactions are quite important.
Yeah, very nice. Bhavesh, for you guys at beIn, especially kind of covering, the online world as well as the more traditional linear TV, and I know this differs per market, but like, how important is this stuff to you? Do you think, fans really buy into polls popping up on screen and having their opportunity to interact? Do people like commenting on things kind of have a real say in your world?
Absolutely. The lean-in experience is really important. In our home market in the Middle East, we're getting regularly over 1 million people watching and playing a Premier League fantasy game with us, and calling in and putting in their comments, and our talent engaging with them. So it's not everyone that wants to do that, but it's because we have all 10 matches every week. On a traditional satellite platform, you can watch all 10 matches, and you can get it on your OTT, and you can get it through your other pay TV platforms in the market on the telcos. So there's ubiquity in terms of the content being available, and everyone wants to engage with it then. So we see that very, very actively. And then when we test content that is more native to the social media platforms, whether it's magazine shows or digital first shows that we put on, and we do probably over 40 shows a week on digital that are native for social, we see a ton of engagement. That is what people want. It is closest to the debate and the heart and the passion of what they're most interested in. And you can get that a little bit in the magazine shows on linear, but when you have 40 shows that you can go really deep, whether it's NBA, La Liga, any topic, we have weekly shows on almost all of it.
Yeah, and kind of fostering that kind of community and that kind of engagement more broadly. That's nice. Adam, I'll come to you. I know that some of the work you've already referenced, you have solutions, you have tools to kind of foster this type of behavior. When you kind of look at the back end and you're seeing the analytics, do you feel that it works?
Yeah. I mean, I was looking literally at the back of the envelope where I noted down some of the stats, and I'd forget it. But what we've seen, if you look at,
I think we need Mike.
Sorry, yeah, I'm normally quite loud anyway. My wife tells me. But yeah, if you look at the stats for our customers, where they have invested in enhancing user experience, and it's not just sort of colors and layout and so on, but building in that kind of content interactivity. The ability to look at stats. Deltatre grew up in the stats world, so in many ways we're all about stats, but looking at player stats and match stats, being able to skip back and forth easily between particular highlights. We're seeing, very measurable gains. So we've got 24% growth in active subs and 53% growth in minutes consumed. So if you understand what your consumers want, and if you build in the capability for them to engage more directly with content, then so back to my earlier point about how we measure engagement, then we can measure engagement in financial terms, which is good.
Yeah, that's probably the best way to present something back to a client, I would.
Well, it makes it easier for us to be in business if we can demonstrate some kind of ROI.
Nice. And Marcel, obviously with NativeWaves, you offer some solutions in this area that partners can tap into?
Absolutely. So additional to Adam's point about understanding the customer, understanding what their habits are, I think we're in a day and age where we can change things very quickly, or we can give instant data to the broadcaster to say, hey, or that feeds through to them to say, that angle's no good, no one's watching it, or they've really responded to this, so they've jumped off that because the camera angles were changed. They've started showing the back of Marquez's bike instead of the front of it. All those sorts of things can start to be built on to say to the people that may be doing the job for 30 years in the OB, to say, maybe you can do it a little bit differently. You have to be quite diplomatic, but those facts and data can be actually extrapolated out very simply, very easily, and actually converted into more engagement for the customer and more content that they're watching, rather than ones and zeros. Are they watching it, or aren't they watching? Exactly.
Yeah, nice. I like that. It's a good way of kind of making that comparison. We're talking broadly about engagement, and I think you guys, especially Adam and Marcel, have touched on this a couple of times already. Like, it only, in many people's minds, would matter if it's delivering bottom line business results. So again, how do you kind of put together that case and make sure when you're working with clients, showing that all of this engagement, all this community you're fostering and growing actually is having a bottom line impact? So I'll start with you, Adam.
Yeah, it's you make an interesting point. I think it's easy to look at very short-term returns, and that would be making a mistake. You need to invest in consumers in the long, or in customers in the long term. We've got some customers who have seen historically a very long lag between consumers starting to engage with content and getting to the point where they're willing to get the credit card out and subscribe. So the goal is to shorten that, and we've got one or two very big sports leagues who are now looking at making more content available for free. To help accelerate that, prove that we've got as a platform provider, as a content provider, prove that we've got something relevant and valuable and interesting. And then if you want to sort of up the ante and see live games and so on and so forth, and get the kind of interactivity and multi-camera angles that we're talking about, then you can start paying. but it's providing, I think, a number of things. It's interesting, relevant content, again, in a way that's relevant. You know, and often you might have to sacrifice a little bit to engage with consumers in the longer term.
Yeah, I like those 2 points that stand out there. Obviously, the long-term play and not looking at this as something too just in the here and now, but also that kind of concept of shortening the journey so that, you know, people aren't kind of spending a long, long time building up their interest, but they're actually capitalizing and becoming a subscriber or whatever the goal is early on. Marcel, I'll just ask you to kind of expand on that and how you guys can help with that process.
I think part of the thing is, okay, it's revenue returns are extremely important and at the end they're the biggest measurable. But differentiation in a crowded market where, you know, you could name 20, 30 different, 400 different companies are doing pretty much the same thing. Differentiation, how you deliver to the customer or consumer, how they look at it and how you treat them. I think that people can get very narky and they can change their subscription instantly. And so I think giving them what they've proven to be choosing and not taking that away from them, even if they're only 15% of the market is doing this particular thing, leave them with it because they'll probably be staying with you for the long term. I think differentiation is definitely a thing that we'd like to put into people in terms of differentiation through innovation, through trying something, through offering more. And I think we can learn a lot from North America in this sense. There's lots of things going on, really exciting things with AR and all these sorts of extra bits, which some people find distracting, but some people love it and it gets them engaged.
Yeah, no, so it's a good point in terms of balancing that between the distraction and actually bringing people in fully engaged. Bhavesh, I'm just going to ask you, similar theme, like you're obviously in the business of driving subscribers both in linear and OTT. Does the business buy into this wider concept of driving engagement first? And I suppose, is it also seen as a way of making sure that your customers don't churn?
So absolutely, engagement is what drives subscribers for us. It's a really good indicator of what our target audiences are, how we can get in front of them, market our offers, and get them to ultimately convert. It's going to vary market by market on where that actually can be done really openly, a bit harder with GDPR and what kind of tracking you can really do in Europe. But engagement in that funnel is super important just in casual, passive behavior. It has nothing to do with watching the match. It's just, did you follow our page? Did you see what our talent is talking about? Did you watch a match clip or did you see a debate that might have happened through our clips? On the retention side, it's really, really important for us to be able to say, hey, who are the people that have sort of slowed down? Who are the people that aren't using our service? And how do we reach out to them proactively before they say, hey, why am I paying 15 euros a month, 30 euros a month for a service that I'm not using? So it's very important to make sure that you engage those users. The trick is how, and for us, we have that global problem in 7 languages and all these different audiences and all these channels, but we're seeing a lot of experimentation in that. And what the folks are doing out in Australia, we can cross-pollinate and put out into the US market and vice versa. What we learned that didn't work in Turkey, we can make sure we don't do that again in France.
Nice, very nice. Please do get your questions in. We're going to jump to those in a moment. But just before we do, Les, kind of similar point. You obviously mentioned engagement for you is very much kind of bottom line business and bringing people in. So I'm guessing your business is bought into that concept more broadly overall.
Certainly our bosses are, yeah. Look, I think first and foremost, you know, everyone talks about data, but we very much built Kayo and the platform we sit on with a data view, and we've got our own CDP. We get to very detailed analysis around cohorts of customers and segments, whether you're a fanatic on a particular sport or your cross-pollination with other sports and so forth. And then the great thing about sports fans is they want to tell you what they love. So, you know, typically someone who comes onto our platform sets preferences of about somewhere between 6 to 10 different sports or teams. So we already know what you're interested in, and then we use the implicit data as well in terms of what you're consuming. And we use all of that to then drive what your homepage looks like. So no one gets the same homepage on Kayo. Sure, there's spots that are, you know, positioned for live and so forth and kind of the tier 1 type sports. But what we're seeing is we're able to surface stuff that you told us or we think you might be interested in, tier 2, tier 3 sports, you know, and start to surface that all around trying to drive engagement in terms of longer duration per week, trying to shift that, you know, 6 hours that we get out of our average subscriber consuming on our platform a week to try and shift it upwards. So data is really critical, and then we kind of got the cohorts. And then what we do, similar to what you're talking about, which is we then use different channels, SMS, notifications, EDMs, different content on those to kind of prod you once we start to see your consumption behavior starting to fall off, or it's the end of the season. We know that 95% of your consumption was on 2 sports and they're coming to an end. You know, it doesn't take Einstein or an AI thing to tell you that they're likely to kind of at churn risk. So it's what do you do about it? And that's where our focus and investment is, in lots of experimentation to try and extend you for a little bit longer.
Super, thank you. Jump into the questions, and there's a few good ones I can already see have come through. So I think we'll start with this one just because you're obviously talking about retaining customers and making sure that they have multiple options. The question is, for fan engagement, do you think we will see multiple audio feeds for a video becoming available on OTT, whether second languages, radio comms, etc.? Is that something you guys offer currently?
When we launched last November, we had cricket, so we had Australia and India was touring, and clearly, you know, a very big team. And we've got a big Indian, you know, population in Australia. So what we actually did was a deal with Star, where we brought in the Hindi language and the whole coverage. It was quite entertaining because you'd watch our kind of pre-game, watch our studio. You'd have Shane Warne and a few other guys sitting there kind of just chatting away. Then they'd throw to the Star kind of studio, and there's just like colours and noise and just a lot of interaction, and it's like quite contrasting. So look, I think those things are definitely things that we are going to continue to experiment with, and I think fans kind of really resonate with it, to be honest.
Nice. And Bhavesh?
Yeah, so on the second languages, we are doing that. We have 3 languages. In the Middle East, we do Arabic, French, and English. So you can choose which language you want to watch a match in. But we've also experimented with sort of fan commentary. So if you want to have, I guess, a biased perspective and sort of that home feeling, for the El Clasico, we've had a fan commentator for both clubs, and done that in Arabic, and people have enjoyed that. I think there's going to be only more and more of it. And I think it's going to be really, really interesting. I think where we're different is we're not a radio broadcaster, and we don't have talk radio. So I don't know if that's something that we would go into, but certainly we've seen some really encouraging results.
Nice. I'll pause on that question just because there's another one I want to get to, and I'm conscious of time. The simple question, what's the fan engagement experience to beat? What's the gold standard? So I'll start with you, Adam.
Yeah, it's interesting. We were talking earlier about Netflix, and saying that everyone uses it, but it's actually not that engaging. You know, it's a very passive kind of experience. Find something, watch it, move on. So I think that's a good example of a very non-engaging yet successful service. Weirdly, sport is clearly very different to the entertainment world. Yeah, it's a difficult one. I think NFL has a lot of strong capability. Thinking about the work we're doing now, I think we haven't launched it yet, would be one good answer. So I'd like to give you a different answer in the middle of next year.
Okay, stay tuned. Next year, the OTT panel, we're going to have a big revelation. I like it. Marcel, for you?
Look, I think it's a broad question. I think that the thing today about choice, and different people like different things. So I don't think you can isolate into one. I think we can learn a lot from esports. Because those guys enable technology they let it in, they get deep down into it, they look at the angles that they want to see, they hone in on certain things. I think it's really hard, but I think providing a multitude of choices will eventually engage the highest percentage of people in the way that they want to, the 10% here, the 5% there, and I think that's what will come to it. One size does not fit all.
Nice. For you, Bhavesh, what stood out for you in the fan engagement experience from publishers broadly?
I think the DV player is really interesting in terms of what it does. It's been doing it for a long time. It's interesting. There aren't that many people that have tried to do the same in terms of the syncing of the video and the camera angles. But I do think it's back to the why is Netflix Netflix? And you've taken a product that's become so easy to use, you actually start thinking this is a passive product that's not that engaging. And that's the trick, right? You want the engagement, but you want it to become a facilitator of the broader experience, which is enjoy the content. And if you really do that, you'll keep coming back. It's trickier for us because if you are a fan of your sport and your club and they're knocked out, it's going to be really hard to have a substitute. Whereas on the entertainment side, you can launch another series or have another movie title for that person to watch. So getting that balance that what Netflix has is going to be really hard with sport, but I think where you have multiple competitions, you have the Liga, and you have Premier League, and you have Champions League, you can actually now have your club. It's just maybe not in one league, but in a different competition, you can offer it. So it's interesting if you can assemble that kind of rights portfolio.
Nice. We're coming close to time. So Les, final thoughts from you. I know you mentioned a number of different experiences you've already built. Is there anything out there that you're aspiring towards?
I mean, I probably agree. I think, we're experimenting. I think how you enable, the big kind of thing that we're focusing on now is how you enable fans who are watching a live sport to communicate with each other without reinventing social, clearly. I wouldn't want to put you guys out of a job, but...
Thank you.
Very unlikely. But I just think little things that you can do to kind of bring, people who are passionate, community-based, team-based, and how you can enable that while they're watching a live sport without, them kind of disappearing. So I think we're kind of looking at a few things around that. I think there'll be subtle things. They won't be kind of major things, but I think facilitating that will be the next kind of bastion of, I think, engagement that we'll be focused on.
That's a good kind of inspiring note to end on. It's been 30 minutes and we've got through so much, so that really did fly. Please put your hands together for our panelists. Thank you.